The big web was thriving back then. It's not like you gather the metrics and immediately throw in $2 million.
Organic growth helped you with that.
The market has become very competitive. New platforms are emerging.
The VK guys are meeting with the Yandex guys.
They're cursing out the admins. It's important to play competitors' games. It's important to pay in the competitors' games. To play with marketing, with payment solutions.
Experimenting, it's a must.
Players demand content. Players demand patches, events. Our users will always stay in our game and keep playing.
That's awesome, really awesome. Hello everyone, Yandex Games is here. My name is Vanya Polukhowicz. I'm head of developer platform at Yandex Games. I have a great guest with me today, Jan Yankeloits, Director of Business Development at the game studio Overmobile. Hi Jan.
Hi.
Before we start our conversation, Jan, I want to thank you for taking the time to come talk to us about your decades of experience, your successful cases, your insights, and how you've adapted to the changing market. I just want to express my gratitude. I hope our conversation will be fruitful, full of insights and useful experiences for our audience. Can you please tell us a bit about what you do?
Hello everyone. Our company has existed since 2006. And we make mobile browser games for many platforms, including Yandex Games.
Why did you choose browser games when you first started?
We chose browser games for several reasons. First, we already knew the mobile market, as the company's founders had previously worked in mobile content, and this made development very smooth. Basically, we just had to build a project in Java or PHP and launch it. Our first project was actually a mobile social network. We launched it hoping to implement a traffic sharing model with the operator. That was in 2007. The project performed well, but the operator didn't share the traffic revenue with us. So we switched to monetization and made our first browser game called Barbarians in 2008. It was a full-fledged MMORPG with an open economy and pure online play. We had a record of 18,000 players in one arena, fighting each other by clicking on their phones and hitting opponents.
18,000 online.
18,000 online, yes. At that time, card payments weren't that advanced in the mobile web, so our main payments were through mobile operators via paid SMS. Then, as the technology evolved, we moved to regular card payments, web money, and other payment methods.
You started making browser games in 2008? Tell me more. What was 2008 like?
2008 was a market dominated by feature phones. These were phones with small screens and keyboards that had the most basic mobile browsers installed. There were no internet packages back then, so the amount of data consumed was very important to users. Our games were simple with minimal graphics, essentially just an icon and a tabular structure. You'd click on links and perform actions. There were also many different WAP portals where users consumed content on their mobile phones. There weren't really mobile versions of social networks yet. As far as I remember, vContact was just starting out. Odnoklasniki. Yes, their mobile versions were just launching. So there were tons of file storage sites, chat rooms, mobile sites, dating sites, and so on. Links to our games were posted on those sites. Players would access them in the same browser. The Opera browser, which compressed data, was very popular. SMS payments were very widespread because no one was using cards. There were only web money and SMS payments. A couple years later, Xsolla appeared, which still provides us with payment solutions today. They offered payments through terminals, web money, cards. Things started moving along.
And in 2008, how did you realize that was the time to go and make games? Compared to the current state of the industry and web platforms, it seems like so much has happened since then. How did you know back in 2008 that this would be your business? And how many of you were there? Was it just you and a few others?
No, I joined the team a bit later, but I was working in mobile content at the time at a content provider company. We were creating services for mobile operators. These were sites with games, content, video, photos, ringback tones, and so on. And we provided SMS payments for companies like Mail.ru. Mamba was a dating service. Overmobile launched their first game. I was connecting this solution for them. Since we essentially came from the mobile market, operators had a business solution where they could share traffic revenues with select sites. They didn't offer big data packages like we do now, with 10-15 gigabytes. Back then, billing was based on 100 kilobytes, as I recall. And operators had premium billing on some domains. So let's say you'd pay 5 rubles for 100 kilobytes spent just browsing. And let's say 10 rubles per kilobyte if you spent time on a particular site. Our first project was a mobile social network called GMI. Users there could chat, play mini-games, send likes and comments to each other. We generated a lot of traffic and had agreements with operators to put us on premium billing and share revenues with us. But for various reasons that didn't happen, so we decided to add premium features to the game, like buying likes for money. This model worked well, which led to the idea of creating a full-fledged browser game. We looked at major web projects at the time, around 2008, like Mail.ru's games such as The Legend of the Dragon, I think. Fight Club was still very popular then. The big web was thriving and making good money, so we thought, why not do this for mobile web?
You sensed there were opportunities and that the area under the curve would work in your favor going forward. As for further milestones, so you joined the company Overmobile, and then its journey over these years had some milestones.
Later, mobile gaming platforms from social networks became a thing. vContact opened its direct games platform around 2017. Then there was Google's native platform. It started strong around 2013-2014 with a lot of organic growth, so we wrapped our games into APKs. They got quite a bit of traffic, which gave us a critical mass of audience. A few years later, Yandex Games launched, along with various other portals. As far as browsers go, we had a good connection with Opera. We worked well with a Chinese browser. In general, various portals and social networks were emerging. We were integrated into mobile phones, either as a standalone app or in vendors' app stores. Huawei App Gallery was eventually launched. A couple of years ago, a mobile operating system called KaiOS was launched for developing markets. It's a unique product from a Hong Kong company, with investors from Google and various funds. They make HTML5-based phones for developing markets. Essentially, it's a feature phone, but with a good browser, YouTube, and its own HTML5-based store. We've been integrated there for Western audiences as well. We have a certain influx of users and revenue. They're growing.
From what I know, some social networks launched gaming initiatives with you, and OK was among them.
Yes, we were the first on Odnoklassniki's mobile platform way back in, I think, 2010 or 2011, I don't remember. Yes, there were a lot of users and money there. They were pioneers, so to speak, of the mobile web for a mass audience.
You've been developing games for over 16 years now, and a lot has happened during that time. Quite a lot has changed in browsers, and the mobile market emerged and evolved from a blue ocean to red ocean. How have you adapted to these changes?
Adapting has been challenging at times, but the platforms we've entered have generally been supportive. As some platforms fade away over time, new ones emerge, always offering opportunities to join them even with an old project and find a new audience. Plus, we've tried to keep track of market trends, play with marketing, play with payment solutions, and adapt very quickly to changes. Google, with its payment services, left our country. We quickly integrated our own payment systems, and 2022 was excellent in terms of revenue for companies that remained in our market, because players didn't go anywhere. They kept playing and paying all the same.
If talking about the technical side of things, you started with browser games. Then, with the advent of the mobile market, You entered it as well. But talking about your technical solutions, can you say a few words about that?
It all depends on the project. We have several projects in development. Some devs write in pure HTML5 and then deploy on native platforms through WebView. We have a game on Unity, our new modern projects that haven't been released yet. They are written in Cocos. We try to look at what's currently available in the market and adapt to current conditions because user requirements for graphics and depth of content are growing, which brings its own technical requirements for development.
I understand that the structure of your projects is long-term mid-core games, where players spend a lot of time. They're with you not just for months, but for years. How big is the role of operations in your workflow? How much effort do you put into developing the game and keeping it relevant for your players after launch?
Well, it's very important because players demand content, patches, and events. And in mid-core projects, or live ops as they're called now, it's crucial. You need to plan out a whole schedule of promotions, events, and patches to retain players and bring them back. It's essential to add a social component to the game. Things like clans and chat rooms allow players to create a game within the game. They compete with each other, chat, and complain about the admins. All of this is present and very important.
So you launch the game, you see some improvements in your usual portfolio metrics. I think that's roughly how it should look. In terms of labor costs, what does it take to maintain a game on the web in your case? I noticed you have at least 11 games in your portfolio.
So, labor costs. In general, for a standard browser-based project, you need a game designer, a few programmers, and a few artists. Essentially, a team of 5 skilled professionals can create a high-quality browser game that can be maintained for many years.
Yes, you have one project hosted on your domain, and you distribute it to different platforms from there. That's interesting. If your game is on 5, 6, or 10 platforms, it sounds like your team can handle that, but how challenging is it to support 5 to 10 versions of a game for different platforms? Is there some kind of support liability?
It all depends on the game. Most of our games run in iframe, so all updates occur within the game and are automatically rolled out across all other platforms. The platform essentially acts as a window into the game through an iframe. Users access the game content directly, so any updates we make on the main server are automatically reflected across other networks. So it's not like we have a dozen platforms. We don't need a separate build for each platform or anything like that.
And the player base is shared. Players from VK meet players from Yandex. And they don't even know.
They don't know anything. They just play with other players, and that's it.
But each platform has its own in-app purchases.
Yes, each has its own, of course. Well, yes, this requires support in some projects. Let's say you have 100 in-app purchases in the game. If you add 10, you need to set them up on each platform, create them, change screenshots, icons, descriptions. But this is just routine work that you do once a month or every 2 months or so. And user support is certainly important for each platform. You need to coordinate your support team with the platform's tech support to quickly resolve all issues.
Given that players can feel abandoned, you have to prevent that from happening so they don't leave.
Of course.
There's a view that Yandex games and other platforms like OK, VK, Crazy Games primarily feature simple games with basic hooks and short-form content, and that the platform is limited to this type of content. Your example seems to contradict this. What's your take on this perception? Do you feel competition? And how do you deal with it? Competition with hyper-casual games, for example, since you have longer, more serious mid-core projects. Do you have competition in this area? And do you have an audience on Yandex games?
We always have an audience on such platforms because social networks were initially focused on games with monetization, as were Yandex games at the very beginning. It just so happened that hyper-casual games started generating more traffic. So yes, people start playing hyper-casual games more often, but they stay much less often. That's why we don't feel strong competition. Our users will always stay with our game and keep playing.
And who is your typical user? How do you envision them?
For the most part, as with most mid-core projects, it's men, 24 and older, with average to above-average income.
With money in their bank accounts that they don't mind spending in the game.
It's easier for them to donate in the game, quietly get some perks, and move up in the rankings. Some people go to the game like it's their job. All the time, yes. They have clans, and so there are wars between clans. They need to log in every Friday at 3 p.m. to fight with their clan and maintain their rank. That's why I call these games games as a service.
But these are hardly just buzzwords. Surely you have data that shows how people fight for their clans on Fridays, like going to work. Based on your experience, would you say that your strategy was different? While many mobile developers and studios are now struggling with the unit economics of the mobile market and facing challenges adapting their games for the web because they didn't consider it from the start, you started with browser games. So entering the mobile market wasn't a major hurdle for you?
Yes, absolutely correct. Browsers were more familiar to us, and we had already gained some experience and an audience for our projects that primarily accessed our games through mobile browsers. It's not just us. Other big players are still working on the web. For example, I think everyone knows the game Chaos Chronicles. They're a public company. They publish their reports, and they still have huge revenues from their fully web-based projects where they have an audience. So, this market is very lucrative, promising, and interesting for many companies.
Regarding the mobile market, what has changed from the time it opened up to new players until now? Could you share your perspective on the evolution of the mobile market, using your company as an example?
As the market evolved, we established our position in it, and we've maintained it ever since. The market overall has become very competitive and saturated. If you look at the top games on iOS and Android, they are pretty much the same in terms of gross revenue. New projects are rare. As for the ones that do launch, they all have massive budgets, like Genshin Impact, which cost hundreds of millions of dollars to develop. Thus, the future for small companies like our lies in targeting niche audiences where we can earn our revenue and continually seeking new niches and platforms to establish ourselves on before the major players move in.
Jan, speaking of small companies, how many people make up a small company? Everyone has different estimates.
In our case, it is about 60 people.
60 people. So, you have 60 people on your support team. Will they support your entire portfolio of projects?
Well, no, not all games, of course. Some team members handle operational issues, accounting, user support, while others are scattered across different projects. It's just that different projects have different resources. So, one game might need a 3-person team, while another might need a 10-person team. It all very much depends on the project.
How does your company structure work in general, as far as game developers having autonomy in their decisions?
They have full autonomy. So, essentially, each game has its own budget, its own vision for development. We, as a company, provide it with some opportunities for development. We are more of an in-house publisher. That is, all of our projects that have been launched in the last few years have grown within the company. Employees have started projects. We supported those projects, and then, of course, they grew into full-fledged projects.
So there's an internal pitching process.
Exactly. We set up an internal pitching phase, followed by co-funding and so on.
And then the team decides, autonomously or with you, about things like distribution platforms.
By default, we distribute directly to the platforms. That means we already have established business processes, so we take the game to all platforms at once.
What is included in your distribution process? And why do you think it's important? Why is it important to distribute the game to a certain number of platforms?
Good question. This is important because when a project is new, distributing to a large number of platforms at once allows it to get a critical mass of audience. In most mid-core games, where there is a lot of interaction between users, the online component is very important. It's really critical. The more people you have playing the game, the stronger the competitive element becomes. The more clans form, the more players start donating. Because people want to pay, they want to be at the top. So if you launch on several platforms at the same time, the platform notices you, you have an influx of players, and the players start competing at once. And so, let's say you get to a critical DAU metric where the built-in concepts kick in. It's clan wars, clan events. And in some projects, we experience a very strong drop in income when traffic also drops. That's why marketing is important for such games. Marketing helps maintain a steady number of users.
So, I just want to clear things up a bit. It turns out that launching a game on multiple platforms gives you a base audience, after which the concept behind the game takes over. In your case, teamwork and competition. Then, it gains momentum and really takes off.
Absolutely.
It'd be interesting to learn more about your launch and distribution processes, just some general details. First, we talked about mobile operators. How do you see the current market structure? What are the distribution options?
Well, first of all, of course, if we are looking at Russia, it's social media. It's Yandex. These are still native platforms. The operators are starting to show themselves a little bit. And that's probably it. Some mobile browsers that we used to have, like Opera from before, you could publish mobile browser games there too, but unfortunately, they no longer cooperate with us. If you look at the global market, where we also have a presence, there's a huge number of HTML5 platforms, game distribution, Poké, Crazy Games, and so on. Facebook is still a serious player in this market, but it is hard launch on. Then there's Amazon, Huawei. So these are all the platforms that you can integrate with and should distribute on, if you have the resources, of course.
Speaking of the global market, how much do you focus on the international audience? Or has your core audience always been and will continue to be Russian-speaking? Do you want to conquer the world? Is there an emphasis on that? What are your priorities here?
We have always wanted to conquer the world. It's just that historically, of course, our core audience was in Russia. The global market is very complex, from both cultural and marketing perspectives. In Russia, we understand the traffic sources, but internationally, these sources are often scarce, or we don't know about them, or they require a lot of work. But the global market isn't much different. If we're talking about Western countries, there's not much of a difference from Russia in terms of content consumption. We have Polish versions of our games. We have English versions, French. There is an audience there. It's not massive, but they still play our games and pay for them. The Asian market is, of course, much more challenging. We've taken some steps in that direction, but we realize that we don't have the resources or the time to deal with that market right now. That's a whole other story. Many Russian projects are successful in the West. Many Western projects are successful in Russia. But few Western projects are successful in Asia. That's just the nature of the market.
Can you give us an example of your strategy for launching new content? A new game is being born in your studio. First, it goes through the pitching stage. Then it gets to the point where it can reach a new audience. Here, you have some sort of checklist of what must be done. And after that, what is the next step of your strategy? There are so many platforms you can bring this content to. So what would your first steps be? How will you know that the game is ready to scale on the platform?
Well, here, basically, you look at the metrics, the growth. You check if you have good retention and whether it falls within the range of your existing projects. Then you analyze market metrics. You look at the revenue, ARPU, LTV. Well, and in general, you rely on intuition, statistics, analytics. You look at everything, whether it's worth raising online, investing in traffic, making patches, one step at a time. It's not like you gather the metrics and immediately throw in $2 million. It's about incremental moves.
So what I'm hearing is that your decisions are data-driven.
Of course they are.
This is my favorite topic, data-driven decision-making. I mean, you can just emphasize that yes, intuition is important, but here, in decision-making, data is everything. By the way, we have a couple of data tools on our platform for data-driven decision-making. A/B tests for creatives, icons, and covers. That's what we call them, and in-game testing. The latter might be less interesting to you, since you probably have your own system for analytics and your own A/B. Do you use A/B testing of icons to improve conversion rates from the Yandex Games catalog? Do you have any experience with it? Any successful cases to share?
These are basic things for any platform, so A/B testing of icons, covers, and screenshots is very important. Even descriptions need to be tested, because people still read them, and something can capture their attention better than what was there before. So yes, we use A/B tests. Let's say we start with an icon as a base, and then we try to come up with several radically different variations. During the pandemic, we changed the icons of some games to show characters wearing masks. We just put regular masks on them. In some cases, it worked very well. In some cases, it didn't. And we still have one game with a mask icon. When COVID was over, we tried to revert to the old icon. It performed worse than the one with the mask. It can be different variations.
A/B testing of the first experience. Have you tried something like that?
We're constantly A/B testing. The constant challenge is to make the tutorial as user-friendly as possible. Moreover, a short tutorial doesn't necessarily mean it will convert better. We've had a case where a longer tutorial, despite its poor conversion rate, actually resulted in more long-term players. And by long-term, I mean those who were learning the ropes and pushed themselves to complete the tutorial. In the end, they stayed with us. I've already spent so much time. How can I leave after spending a full 15 minutes on a tutorial?
There's something I'd like to know. There are these practices where you look at a new player's profile, their actions, let's say, their engagement. And you don't cut the player off. You don't say there's a certain level of skill we expect you to have to play this game. We have high standards here, and you don't meet them. Sorry. Do you use adaptation mechanics of some kind? I mean, for example, if a player... do you adapt or adjust the complexity of the game? Don't you use principles like that in your games?
No, we don't. Instead, we use unique price points for a diverse cohort of users. These are very well-known mechanics, like first-time payment incentives or payment reminders, or in general, if it's a high-level payment, other payment tiers open up. We keep things interesting all the time.
So it's also related to analytics, to the data-driven approach. If I understand correctly, you rank players based on their actions and group them into cohorts. Then you have strategies to move users between cohorts, along with various mechanics refined over many years of experience. That's really cool. From what you've said, it sounds like you must have some powerful analytics. Is this an in-house solution, or do you use external tools? Considering you're on multiple platforms, not just Yandex games.
For in-game analytics, we use our proprietary solution for the most part. Each game has its own internal analytics system. For external sources, we use platform analytics and various trackers if we're purchasing traffic. So, the overall picture is created from several data sources.
Let's talk a bit about traffic acquisition then. Why do you need to buy traffic? Can you explain to our developers why traffic acquisition is necessary?
Well, besides social platforms, we have a native presence on iOS and Android. In our mid-core RPG genre, there's practically no organic traffic. So to attract users, we need to do marketing and buy traffic. We're also experimenting with social media advertising. Okay, VK Yandex, they have convenient tools for this. If finances allow, companies should acquire as many users as possible. If you're only developing for native platforms like Android, you need to be prepared to invest a lot of money in marketing. Whereas mobile web and desktop web still allow you to rely on organic traffic. We have social networks and platforms like Yandex Games. We're also seeing a new trend with mobile operators beginning to discover the gaming audience. So it's quite feasible for a small studio or developer to create a good browser-based project, launch it on these platforms, get organic traffic, and earn revenue through in-app purchases or advertising.
I see.
And import it to mobile platforms as well.
Let me summarize where you get players for your content. I divide it into two main groups. First, since you work on the web, there are various platforms that naturally provide some organic traffic. Good content with strong metrics can get more traffic from these platforms. Second, being on the web means search engines can find your game, providing some organic traffic from searches. And here's another super important thing. If you have quality content, you can collaborate with super apps, leveraging the power of their distribution channels. They're interested in good content with strong retention and monetization metrics. The doors are open for such partnerships. Overall, it sounds like this is the plan you're sticking to, and it's working, judging by your long journey.
Wherever there's traffic and an entry point for users, you can always place games. It doesn't matter if it's a super app, a messenger, or something else. There is this beautiful example of China's WeChat, which has a huge catalog of mini-games. For a long time they went without games, then they added games, and now there's a huge market. Chinese gamers are trying to get into V-Contact. I know you've been approached by a lot of Chinese developers. Of course, simply copying games off of WeChat won't work, because games need to be adapted to the culture of each country. But nevertheless, the trend is there.
Yes, adapting Chinese games is also challenging because you have to fit different amounts of text into the same space.
Yes, it's complicated.
And I also thought it'd be useful to look at your game content through the eyes of a super app owner. What's their motivation for integrating games? Probably to get users to return to the super app again and again to increase retention. So it becomes a prerequisite for the game. The game should also generate retention, at least be as good as the super app itself. So retention is a key metric here. The game content needs to capture players' attention and keep them coming back, giving them an additional reason to return to the super app or any other platform. So content quality is key.
The game needs to have depth. It should unfold gradually for the user. It's very important to use the mechanisms provided by the platform, like push notifications, updates, posting on personal pages, or any other communication features. Basically, anything that has to do with virality. You need to keep users coming back, again and again.
Keep them coming back, and also enable them to invite friends, because when you enjoy an experience, you want your friends to try it as well.
In short, you should always communicate with the platform. Advocate for your interests as a developer, but also try to understand the platform's interests, because sometimes your KPIs as a developer may differ slightly from the platform's KPIs. For example, you may care about earnings, while the platform cares about user retention. So you need to negotiate and communicate to maximize both revenue and retention.
Do you run seasonal promotions across all platforms? Do you have such functionality?
Besides seasonal promotions, we regularly run unique promotions with certain platforms. For instance, with Yandex Games. 2 years ago, we ran tournaments exclusively for Yandex Games players. We gave away Yandex stations.
Oh cool, I didn't even know that.
So yes, we do all of that.
What prospects do you see for yourself right now? And in general, for web games, web platforms, and everything in this sphere?
I see good prospects because the web isn't going anywhere. We all use the internet and browsers. And from what I can see now, there are a few trends. First, mobile carriers are trying to create their own gaming platforms. As a developer, I'd love for major financial companies like Sberbank and Tinkoff take notice of us because I think that could be a great opportunity for our audience. And messengers like Telegram are actively working on their own gaming platforms, though it's more about traffic flow than monetization at this point in time. But hopefully that will change.
I absolutely share that view. The growth rate of our service is increasing, and the goals we set and achieve each year are very promising. If you recall our January broadcast, where we discussed the total payouts to all developers last year, and the fact that this number continues to grow, it instills optimism. Plus, if we talk about technological advantages, let's say the development of our browser platform, there's already extensive coverage of technologies like WebGPU, which, when implemented with engines and content, will bring a wide range of advanced content to browsers. It feels like we're only starting our journey, and the current state of the browser market differs significantly from the mobile market. That's why browser games, in my opinion, are the real blue ocean right now. And speaking not only about you specifically but about our platform as a whole, I think we're in a unique position. Currently, any developer who can meet our minimum requirements can join our platform. Yes, we have many requirements, but I wouldn't call them overly complex, and our entry threshold simply requires meeting these conditions. We don't have a stringent editorial policy saying, no, we don't accept this content. So in that sense, we're a platform that's open to a wide range of developers. I think that's our value as a platform. We say, we're open, Look, it's a blue ocean, we're open. Come make your first moves. Learn how to find your first audience, how to manage a game, review feedback, monitor metrics. Try to see your game as a product, and the metrics will guide you. I think that our platform is a great start for those who want to take their first steps in game development. And then, once you've gained some experience, once you've taken those very first steps, found an audience, found a niche, and the organic reach has helped you and given you that much-needed traffic, then you're welcome to expand onto other platforms, like mobile. I personally believe this is an ideal opportunity. Starting with mobile today would require a lot of skills to attract a sufficient audience and analyze metrics to make sure the game resonates with the audience. It doesn't seem like the best idea to start with mobile right now when web platforms, Yandex games, and others provide such opportunities. Games and other platforms. I think we possess this great quality, this openness to developers who want to dedicate themselves to making games. And there's nothing to stop them from doing that on our platform. That's my feeling.
Plus, it's likely that not all genres are represented on your platform. There are gaps in some genres, and if you conduct thorough research and see what's missing on your platform, you could launch a highly engaging project that will attract its own audience. Rather than just mindlessly replicating existing content for the 20th or 30th time, look into what's truly needed on the platform.
Am I correct in assuming that creating, for example, mechanics that are already successful on Yandex games and then taking risks to release them again might not be worth the effort? Or is it actually worth it?
Good question. It's best not to jump to conclusions. Every case might be different. This is where your recommendation system will indicate how it would promote a game with familiar mechanics versus something new.
Looking at your portfolio, to what extent do you rely on existing mechanics when developing new games? I mean, do you ever consider taking an existing game, slightly changing the setting or design, and then releasing it?
No, it's more about drawing on our own experience, though we do study our competitors very closely. For instance, we are thoroughly deconstructing this new game, AFK Journey. We are analyzing its mechanics. It's fascinating. But overall, yes, we focus primarily on mid-core games. We know how to do it, and we understand the genre well. We might tweak the setting or adjust the content, but this remains our genre.
You have dozens of projects. How isolated are they from each other? I mean, based on what you've said, how does your team support each project? And to what extent do you share technologies, approaches, and some basic mechanics? Because if you don't do that, it will obviously cause maintenance issues down the line. How do you balance reusing mechanics across games with the freedom to choose your preferred tech stacks?
In terms of game design, we reuse the best solutions we come across. If some game introduces an interesting new event or monetization mechanic, everyone takes notice and asks how it was achieved. We adopt and adapt. It's a completely standard practice. It helps, let's say, to add something more basic to these mechanics to boost revenue across projects. So you need to reuse proven methods, monitor your competitors, and try to understand what makes their approach successful. It's not guaranteed that you'll be able to reuse a mechanic successfully, but you have to try.
Thanks for that. What about this practice in the context of your game engine? You mentioned you use your own custom engine, although there are other options. Have you ever regretted not choosing an external solution with extensive documentation and community support, yet you stayed with your own engine?
No, we've probably never regretted it. There may be some doubts, but once you've already started a project with one engine, sometimes it's easier to finish it than to start over with a new engine.
I can say that a custom engine is a competitive advantage that allows us to launch new projects. Do you have a set plan for what genre or mechanics to use when launching a game?
Well, typically, our game designers favor mid-core battlers or card battlers, so that's our main focus. We had a successful project. We're still running Dream Skyscraper. The idea came from our devs seeing an Android game called Tiny Tower and liking its core mechanics. In this game, you build a skyscraper and manage residents. We ported this game to the web and added a lot of new features along the way. We added clans, social features, investors, and various mini-quests. That's essentially it. In general, inspiration often comes from discovering a cool game. This game stands out from our typical portfolio. Still, it's one of our most profitable titles. We saw cool mechanics, we saw a cool game, and we thought about how we could reimagine it with our expertise. For example, Mail.ru had a game called City of Dance. Basically, it's a game about virtual characters dancing. Take that mechanic, add clans, dance teams, and a few other features. And you've got yourself a ready-to-go mid-core dance project.
Can you share some numbers? Your portfolio consists mainly of mid-core games, so you probably already have a database, experience, and projections of how much it costs to get a game to market and maintain it until it starts generating significant revenue. How long does it typically take from developing a concept, pitching it to the developers we've mentioned, to actually getting the game into your portfolio?
About a year and a half? This is the average development time from prototype to a version where you can bring in users and test mechanics. After that, it depends entirely on the team's resources. Some are quicker, and some take their time.
And something helps sustain you over such a long period, I think. Of course, it's not quite the same as developing large games or games from the past. What gives you confidence that a game with this kind of gameplay and setting will find an audience after a year?
Well, first of all, probably our experience. We've made games like this before. We know there's an audience for them. We know how to attract and monetize an audience. So it's just about having an idea, a desire to create a project and develop it.
And now, it's probably best not to reveal too much about new projects just yet. But how do you decide on the genre, mechanics, and niche for a new game in your portfolio?
Well, first of all, we evaluate our competition. And our game designers also have an intuition for the kind of game they'd like to play themselves. So it's more about the developers wanting playing this game themselves. And our game designers have a lot of experience playing these kinds of games. And they also have a clear vision that we're making this specific product, taking popular mechanics from recent projects, reusing them, and bringing them to market.
I see. It turns out the game designer is a very important figure.
Very important. I'd say they're probably the brains of the project.
How problematic is it, in general, to do something like this? You install a game, study its key mechanics, and get inspired by it. If you're a game designer, you'd then go and try to get your colleagues excited about it. And the game designer comes and says, I saw this game, it has cool mechanics. Let's make something similar. And then you go ahead and do it. How do you generally approach this? How do you fight with the feeling of plagiarizing other people's work? Or how do you avoid looking like you're just copying other people's mechanics? What's your take on all this?
We see using others' mechanics as a positive approach. You shouldn't just copy them, you need to reuse them. Mechanics often integrate deeply within a game. It's not enough to just pull out a mechanic and put it in your own game without grounding it in some in-game entities. It just might not work. For example, you might take an award system from another game, rework it for your project, and add new elements. This approach works really well. It's important to play competitors' games. It's important to play both competitors' games and your own, and learn to adapt their ideas to your own game.
In other words, it's not enough to just absorb an idea. You need to process it, make sense of it, understand why it works, and then possibly use these mechanics to make your games better. And this is a natural part of the evolution process. So basically, we all look at each other's content and ultimately create better content for players. But it's not about borrowing blindly, it's about understanding first if I'm getting this right.
Yes.
That's a powerful insight. That's a powerful hook. You must have had to, but can you talk about this experience? Shut down a game because you realized you couldn't go any further with it?
Yes, we've had projects in both mobile and desktop web that we'd invested in and worked on. But then, they either failed to meet the metrics, or the team simply burned out and realized it was no longer interesting to work on and invest in it. So yes, we've had to shut some of them down. And this is a completely standard practice. Talking to other developers and managers, I've learned that there are two strategies in game development. The first is to try to kill a project as quickly as possible by constantly monitoring the metrics. And if there's no growth, your job is to recognize as early as possible that you're heading for failure and cut your losses. The second strategy is to keep pushing until the very end. Both strategies are valid. It's just that the second one is more resource-intensive. And then there's the famous Coin Master game. You've probably heard of it.
Coin Master? Well, there's been a lot of hype around coin-themed games these days.
Anyway, it was very successful a few years ago and still is. And the game itself was in development for, I think, 5 years. They kept trying and experimenting to make it work. 5 years is a long time for a game. Then, apparently, they did something right, and the revenue just skyrocketed. So there are success stories like that. And then there are cases where people spend 5 years developing a game, and it just limps along, and it seems a shame to shut it down. And somehow, there just aren't enough resources for development.
A game with complex content, high playtime per player, strong retention, great LTV. With all that, it would seem like nothing could go wrong. We've already discussed how browser-based games and the web as a platform have good prospects, with technological improvements continuing to improve game quality. You also mentioned a case about feature phones with a browser-based OS. All of this is encouraging, but if we talk about potential problems on the horizon, what are they? What risks do you currently see for Overmobile in general or for some of your specific titles?
The biggest risk now is the sheer number of new applications that consume users' time. Things like marketplaces, TikTok, YouTube, Telegram channels. These all draw users in and keep them from entering the game. These are our direct competitors, not just for us, but for all gaming projects. After all, a user's time is limited. Time is a resource. And the more time they spend on wild berries scrolling through fun product feeds, the less time they spend in the game.
So it turns out that you with your gaming content and we as a platform were competing for the same pie of time spent, and then there's a fact that these players weren't in the market before, and now they're competing with us. And you just have to take that into consideration.
Yes, we need to do that. We need to add interesting mechanics, see what keeps players engaged, provide quick support for questions, simplify gameplay interactions, and make authorization and payment as straightforward as possible, so users don't leave your game and stop engaging with your content.
Do you have some advice for aspiring developers who might watch this recording?
I'd first and foremost advise developers to play both their own games and their competitors' games to understand the player's experience. Because many people make games haphazardly. They don't even test them. Don't dive deep into them. And if your project includes in-app purchases, it's very important to go through the entire payment process yourself. Actually, take out your card, enter the details, and pay within your game. It really helps to understand where there might be hiccups in the payment process or any friction in the user journey. And test it on all devices. If you have an iPhone 13, buy yourself an Android, since most of your audience will probably be using Android. If your game doesn't run smoothly on it, figure out what you're doing wrong.
That too.
And ideally, test on a non-flagship Android model. Okay, now on to the last few games. I only play on the Switch. I'm more focused on business. I'm trying to remember the last really impressive game I played. But if we're talking about Battler, there's AFK Journey. Everyone's obsessed with it. They're pouring resources into it, looking into how it's designed. For beginner developers, here's another key idea. Try bringing experiences from other platforms to mobile. For example, who would have guessed a few years back that mobile shooters would become so popular? It seemed weird. Like, you are used to playing Doomquake. Wait, it's too old school. You're used to playing Counter-Strike. Yeah, why would you need CS on mobile? But in the end, they made CS for mobile, and now it's a multi-million-dollar venture. Can you imagine GTA on a mobile phone?
For a while, yes.
For a while, yes, but now it's a massive market with a huge player base and tons of organic traffic. Because yeah, they took the genre and brought it to mobile platforms. And horror games. We all think that horror is mostly a Steam thing, but someone will definitely bring horror to mobile. And it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be interesting and addictive.
Yes, it's about evolving approaches. But it's also essential to consider traffic structure. If you limit yourself by thinking this only works on desktop, it'll never succeed on mobile, you're missing out. You still have to give it a try, given the current traffic structure. At least on our platform, about 35% of traffic is desktop. That means 65% is mobile. So, if you're not developing for mobile, you're missing 2/3 of the audience.
That's true. Still, desktop probably brings in more revenue from in-app purchases than mobile does. And desktop ad space might also be pricier. And mobile has a larger audience overall. So there's a balance to be struck. Another crucial point for most developers is to experiment with monetization. For example, many game developers shy away from ad-heavy monetization.
How is it in your case?
We have a positive attitude towards it, but not in all projects. Since our project consists of independent teams, some are wary of it, others actively use it. But in general, thanks to the fact that some platforms have the option not to show ads to paying users. You have it in-app, for example. This is a very good solution. Advertising has now become a perfectly understandable way of monetization for most games, including free-to-play ones, and incorporating video ads is quite a good idea.
Also, compare it to interstitial ads that appear during gameplay and are obviously distracting, whereas rewarded video ads organically complement the gameplay. Want something better? Here's a bonus, please. And there's something else I'd like to ask. If a game is based on an ad monetization model, it obviously depends on the auction, on the advertising network of Yandex or some other platform. Your games are predominantly free-to-play. How much do you depend on seasonality in terms of CPM, according to your metrics?
We depend on seasonality in the sense that in the summer, there's a natural decline in in-game activity, because it's the vacation season and so on. It grows in the fall, increases a lot around the New Year holidays, because, again, it's vacation time. We run different promotions. For example, in our country, most people spend 9 days on the couch for the New Year holidays, and there's no better way to play a game than lying on the couch. That's why we have the biggest promotions and the highest revenue during those periods. Generally speaking, it's holidays, February 14th, February 23rd, March 8th, and May 9th. And in summer, there's a slight seasonal decline.
Considering this seasonality, what's the best time to launch? So we have 12 months, and you're preparing a new title.
Summer is probably the best time to launch something. Do some testing, see what works, make sure everything is working properly, and then in the fall, you can release to platforms, request features, and run promotions as new audiences emerge.
The fall is commercial release. That's when you launch. Buy ads. Maybe, release, request features, and that's it. You could say it's a full-scale launch.
Yes, you shouldn't launch around New Year's because New Year's is always, even in traffic acquisition. The auctions are in overdrive, many big players coming in all at once, budgets getting depleted. Since in AD buying we're essentially competing for users with marketplaces, electronics stores, cosmetic shops, we often lose, and users become very expensive. But in early January, you can acquire traffic smoothly, because all the sales and discounts in stores have already passed. Ads need to be seen by someone. That's why we often increase advertising budgets at the beginning of the year and acquire cheap users who will continue to pay later on.
And in terms of promotion, does that mean you buy and place ad campaigns both on web and mobile?
That's absolutely correct. Well, mobile has bigger budgets because the ad networks are set up to optimize for acquisition of paying players. Players who watch ads. Higher quality audience comes from there. It's a little harder to work with, but since social networks and HTML5 platforms have now developed their own acquisition mechanisms, we use those too.
Yes, excellent. By the way, the promotions section on Yandex games will also get an update. Stay tuned. We're running out of time. I suggest we wrap it up. It was a meaningful and fascinating conversation. I was super excited to hear about your experiences, the lessons you've learned, and the insights you've gained along the way. I think your experience will be super valuable to developers watching this recording, and thank you so much for coming. It was nice spending time with you.
Thank you very much, Vanya.